Ladies and gentlemen, it's the Big Jiu-Jitsu Show, member of the Pod Bros Podcast Network. Don't forget to go to podbros.com and find yourself another podcast you want to listen to. And don't forget to check out our sponsors, Trap and Roll Soap Company, Rolls Gear, and Tape Armor. I'm Rob, and I had Andrew Smith on the show. He's been around the block a bit, and he's primarily based in Richmond, Virginia. I had a really good conversation with him. We talked a little bit about jiu-jitsu, starting a club. He's also a judo guy, did some wrestling. It's a really interesting story, and he has some really good insight on what it takes to run an academy. So I really do hope you guys enjoyed this episode, and don't forget to check out all of our other episodes on bjjshow.com. Buy a shirt, buy a patch over there too, and don't forget to rate and review us on iTunes. I will see you guys later. How's your, I know it's kind of early out there, isn't it? About 11?
It's 11. So far, so good, man. I've got a project ahead of me for the rest of the day. I'm going to go over to one of our black belt Russ Helms' house, watch some videos with him, jiu-jitsu videos, for a long-term project I'm working on. So I'm pretty excited for that.
Nice. So, before we really get into it, first of all, this is the, ladies and gentlemen, this is the Big Jiu-Jitsu Show, member of the Pod Bros Podcast Network. Don't forget to go to podbros.com and find yourself another podcast you want to listen to. And I'm Rob, and right now I'm here with Andrew Smith, who's probably more famously known for his posts about big guy jiu-jitsu, which I think is pretty awesome in my opinion, because being the Big Jiu-Jitsu Show, it's a big deal for us, right?
Yeah. Well, I don't discriminate, that's for sure. Jiu-jitsu is for everybody, and that definitely includes people that are much bigger than me.
Yeah. No, I hear you. So if you could, Andrew, could you give our listeners kind of a rundown about how you got started, what got you into jiu-jitsu, and what brought you up to this point?
Sure, Rob. Well, like a lot of people, I wrestled in high school, and I really enjoyed it. I like the camaraderie, the competition, the toughness, but most of all, I think I really like the ability for technique to trump strength. Technique can overcome even like somebody who's bigger, stronger, meaner than you, whatever. I was really fortunate to have a great wrestling coach growing up named Ken Wilson. This was at Spring Valley High School in Columbia, South Carolina. That's where I grew up. And because of the good team and the good bunch of people that was around, grappling was sort of ingrained pretty early on in me. Not early on like some of the kids who are starting jiu-jitsu these days, that are 5 and 6 years old, that are already doing things that I didn't learn how to do until I was 30-something, But wrestling was great. It afforded that. It gave me a glimpse into the technical aspect because I had such a good technical wrestling instructor. And then, a few years went by. I graduated high school, and I wanted to continue with wrestling, but the college that I went to didn't have a wrestling team and even didn't have a wrestling club, which I thought was just horrible. And I was unable to wrestle for that year. And at the same time, I was going through some changes in life, growing up a little bit. I decided that I wanted to move from Columbia, South Carolina, to Richmond. And Richmond represented kind of adventure to me. There was also a really thriving punk rock scene in Richmond, and there wasn't much of one in Columbia at the time. There were some really good bands in Columbia, but they only played out every once in a while, and it just wasn't a community, and I wanted to be a part of a community in that regard as well. So Richmond sort of called to me. I moved up here I had to take a year off to establish in-state residency so that I could finish my bachelor's degree. I started out as an engineering major, and then I switched to art, figuring that I might as well do something that's going to be completely useless for the rest of my life. So I got an art degree. But anyway, while I came up here to Richmond, that's where I am now, I was lucky enough to find a judo club at VCU. And so what I did first is in 1997, I took a judo class. And it was a very slow-paced class, naturally they had to accommodate all the students and safety was prioritized, which looking back, I'm grateful for, and I'm able to take that sort of approach with running a gym nowadays. But 21 years ago, it wasn't really my main priority, you know. So the club was a little more active, and I got involved right away with the judo club. So judo was sort of the first martial art I really got into. Was, you know, if you don't want to count wrestling, I guess that's sort of up for debate. But I got really into judo more or less right away, and there were a whole bunch of people that were making their way over to the judo club from some of the other jiu-jitsu schools in the area. There were only like 2 jiu-jitsu schools at the time, but everybody was coming over. I say 2, and that's a little bit of a funny number because, you know, there's sort of like pseudo people that were doing grappling, but they didn't really brand it as jiu-jitsu and things of that nature. It was sort of the Wild West back in the late 90s. But anyway, bottom line, some jiu-jitsu people started to infiltrate the judo club. I was there and I really enjoyed it. And meanwhile, I had started watching the UFC and everything, like many people. Really enjoyed what I saw out there and how I saw that, you know, wrestling and grappling with some submissions could overcome sort of somebody who's bigger than you. You could neutralize a lot of different things. You could do well in a self-defense scenario or an MMA type scenario. So I appreciated the value of jiu-jitsu. But for me, it was never really about self-defense. It was always about kind of the chess game that goes on when you start learning how to do this stuff. I kind of think that, you know, what starts people doing jiu-jitsu is a lot different than what keeps them doing that, if that makes any sort of sense, you know?
No,
I
was going to say it does.
Go ahead.
No, it's fine. I was going to say it does because a lot of people just sign up or start and they're like, they have this idea, but usually they stay for something completely different, which I think is awesome. But I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt your story. Go ahead.
Not at all. I needed to take a breath anyway, man. I've been kind of monopolizing the conversation for a little bit here, but but it is kind of a longer story, I guess. So, Eric Berto moved to Richmond around this time, around 2001, and maybe late 2000, and decided that he wanted to start a jiu-jitsu school. And I was really excited because I just didn't feel comfortable training in any of the jiu-jitsu schools in the area. And I was really excited for Eric because, you know, I was friends with him. We got along really well. And so when he opened up Richmond Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, I was there in the first class, really excited to help him accomplish this and get the gym open and everything. And so there was a really good home. Meanwhile, I was still training at the judo club and everything. But I would come over to Eric's gym 2 to 3 times a week in the beginning. There weren't a whole lot of classes at Eric's gym right away either, just because most schools when you start, you don't really want to start going a million miles an hour in the very beginning naturally. So as the school grew, I was a pretty big part of it. I was really, really happy to be there, and it was very much a community effort. You know, all of us were trying to help keep the thing going and everything, but Eric was the entrepreneur here, you know, so he had the guts to do this thing at a pretty scary time. And so anyway, I became a big part of the academy. I was able to start teaching classes on once a week, you know, to trade for tuition or something like that, you know, just kind of a starving artist type of approach. I loved jiu-jitsu. I was traveling around all over the place trying to train with as many different people as I could, trying to go and see different black belts and stuff like that. I'd go to, you know, seminars or I'd travel to go train with other friends' gyms in other cities and other states and everything. And backing up a little bit, you know, in judo, competition was always of interest to me because I really missed the competition aspect of wrestling too, you know, when I graduated and I moved away and everything. And so judo sort of took the place pretty quickly. I did like an in-house tournament in 1997 and I did well. I was able to pin people and maybe throw one guy or something, but I was like, this is awesome. And so I found another tournament that was called the Virginia State Judo Championships. And I actually won just by being big and pinning people pretty much at the time. And so that's sort of what I did. You know, again, it really encouraged me. I was like, wow, cool. I can win something that, you know, I wasn't under any illusions about being a state champion and what that really meant. You know, it was like a tournament they called a state championship, so that was cool. But anyway, it didn't matter to me. It encouraged me to go out there and compete more. And so because of this, I was also looking for jiu-jitsu tournaments because all the people that were coming in and influencing us with jiu-jitsu. So I guess I started competing in jiu-jitsu tournaments before I started formally training in jiu-jitsu. And so I was going out and I was doing well naturally because I had some wrestling and I had a judo background as well that coincided with the jiu-jitsu instruction that I was getting. And so I did pretty well in competition in the beginning, got my blue belt in maybe 3 months after formally starting, got my purple belt about a year and a half later, started my own gym in 2006, which is kind of a longer story too, but I don't want to give this thing. I wanted to give this answer the credit that it deserves, but not any additional time, if that makes any sense.
No, it does. It does.
So I think that's what the difference is.
So when you started your gym, you said 2006. You're a purple belt at this point, and that's kind of like then, because that was about the time I started jiu-jitsu, and having like a brown belt was mind-blowing, like absolutely mind-blowing, who I trained under. So a purple belt was just as mind-blowing to me because you never saw it. So as a purple belt, kind of starting a gym at that time, like what were some of the pitfalls or some of the challenges you found as far as getting started in it?
Well, that's a really good question. I think the pitfalls that I faced are going to be different than the pitfalls that people today are facing. Because for us back then, I would say that one of the biggest kind of obstacles that we had was knowledge about what Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu was. In 2006, this is immediately after The Ultimate Fighter had first gotten on cable TV, which definitely means I was in the right place in the right time when I started my gym and everything. But part of the challenge initially was, getting people in to see what jiu-jitsu was about. There was a perception that, it was just MMA, that there was punching in the face and stuff like that. It was sort of brutal, and, all of the marketing for Vale Tudo and whatnot in the late 90s sort of shot us in the foot in the long run, because it took a while to sort of overcome that as gym owners. That's the most important thing, I guess, is a feeling of safety when you walk into a martial arts gym. You don't want to walk in and say, oh, everybody here is going to kick my ass. This is no good. I need to leave. If you have that feeling, you're probably not going to come back. So that was part of it, the intimidation factor. I mean, part of it was sheer economics too. I was insanely fortunate the way I went about doing this. I knew that I needed to bootstrap it. I didn't have a ton of money, or really any money to speak of. So what I did is I approached a karate school owner about essentially partnering, and I got a share of money that came in, and he took the rest, and it was an equitable split. It was great for me. He handled all the marketing and the billing and things of that nature, the stuff I didn't really know how to do, and I knew how to teach at that point, or at least within reason, I knew how to teach. And that was a pretty big deal for me, and I think that would have been a tremendous limitation for getting started if I hadn't had such a great leg up with the dude that I started with. His name was Brian Kennedy. He's a great guy. And interestingly enough, his son, who was one of my first students, trains with me today. He took 10 years off to drink beer and get fat, or whatever kids do, and then he came back and he realized that he still wanted to do it. Yeah, so it's sort of full circle for me, and I really appreciate that James has come back and trains with us now. But it's a pretty awesome story to kind of follow as well with jiu-jitsu, because we don't have to educate people as much as we used to in terms of what Brazilian jiu-jitsu is. So I think the narrative's changed a little bit in regard to what people know when they're coming in, what they expect. Almost everybody knows a little bit about jiu-jitsu thanks to, the UFC being much more mainstream, being on actual cable television instead of, pay-per-view and satellite and stuff like that only. I started the gym as a purple belt, so an obvious limitation was my lack of knowledge. I was pretty good purple belt, I guess, for what that meant back then, meaning I was doing really well in competition and rolling well at the gym and stuff, and I enjoyed teaching. It was in my blood. Both of my parents were teachers for a living and everything, and they sort of ingrained that into me early on. But with that lack of knowledge, I had a long way to go, and I didn't really. It's like the thing you don't know is the thing that is going to really get you, you know. So I didn't understand things like structure, how to really truly build a good fundamentals curriculum, how to do it at the same time. But also, I'll say this, and this is something that every gym owner goes through. It's not as easy as it might look. You know, when you're starting out with a small handful of students, and you've got varying different levels, varying different physical abilities. It's not the easiest thing in the world to teach a class that everybody's going to get something out of, and it's definitely not the easiest thing in the world to stick to your guns and say, you guys should be learning this fundamental thing, when it's really appealing to me to show you the hottest new thing that I just learned at a seminar or figured out while rolling or whatever. So having the discipline and the consistency to teach the things that the students actually needed to see, that was probably one of the biggest challenges that I faced in the beginning that I didn't even really kind of know was a challenge. In retrospect, I can see it really clearly now, and I've since made, you know, lots and lots of changes, kind of evolved in my thinking, but I would say that's a big problem that I faced back then, and today's jiu-jitsu instructors are going to face as well. So I think that maybe gives you some insight there into some of the struggles. You know, I was a purple belt. Like I said, I was a pretty good purple belt. I got my brown belt maybe a month after opening the school. It was a close call on the timing, whether I would open it or wait until I got my brown belt first. But I was very, very ready to do jiu-jitsu full-time at that point. I was not interested in doing anything else with my life, and so I was very determined to make it work no matter what. Kind of followed the principle of burning the ships, you know, like Cortez or Pizarro, I forget which, was, you know, the people that were there to, of course, you know, exploit the natives and so forth, were like, we want to go back home. This place sucks. You know, South America's not for us. And we said, that's cool. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to burn all of the ships so that you can't go back home. And they said, oh, okay, cool. I guess we're going to make it work then after all. And so I kind of burned my own ships to some extent. You know, I had gotten to the point where I had, you know, no money in the bank or very, very little money in the bank. I decided that I was not going to have a place to live for a little while so I could travel and do jiu-jitsu, do like the couch surfing, road tripping kind of thing. You know, when I got back, I mean, I just had zero cash in the bank. You know, I had no ability to do it, but I made it work because I had to. And I think that it's not a bad strategy for business within reason. You know, you don't really want to burn the ships and all the trees that you're going to use to make other future ships from, you know, and that's certainly something that can happen. You can overshoot the mark there, but for the most part, I think it's a healthy kind of way to motivate yourself.
No, I do agree, because there is a certain part of doing it, and then you're just kind of like, hey, I need to be able to, I guess, succeed. And usually when people have that safety net, they don't really get ambitious. I guess maybe the best way I see it is that it's scary. Like, I ran a Taekwondo school. I know it's not the same, but it's still kind of a scary thing. That's like, you know, your income, your ability to eat relies on being able to give good classes, and not everybody's going to be down with jumping into a martial arts school and training and being comfortable with that. So I think it's very much an interesting way to go about it, but I think it's also like something I think more people need to realize, is that it's not rainbows and leprechauns and unicorns. As soon as you open up a school, like, money's just going to fall from the sky.
Yeah, I have the perception that, well, first I'd say that running a Taekwondo school is a lot like running a jiu-jitsu school. I mean, it's a subscription-based model, so that's really similar. In other words, you're trying to get people to sign up for a monthly auto draft of some sort. You know, you're not really trying to collect payments every month unless you're, you know, running a much more difficult school to run than you ought to be, you know, and there's plenty of other common similarities. You develop a community within, you know, of course, the big difference is within the martial art itself and the way that affects the culture of the gym. But, you know, there definitely are tons and tons of similarities. Like, running a Taekwondo school is way more similar to running a jiu-jitsu school than 99.99%, I'd say, other businesses, right? It's more similar to running a jiu-jitsu school than, say, running even like a Gold's Gym or like, you know, any other independent business. So, yeah, I don't want to talk about this too much longer, but I mean, for people that are like seeking out knowledge, you know, one of the places where a lot of pretty good knowledge came from as far as how to run a business with jiu-jitsu did come from the traditional martial arts arena, and that's because, you know, traditional martial arts has been around and been prominent for a lot longer than jiu-jitsu has, and they've solved the same problems that jiu-jitsu has to solve, essentially in terms of marketing and administration and, you know, how to run a business, basically. But anyway, I don't want to fall too far off the rails. I just wanted to kind of make that distinction because I do think it's important for people to understand that, you know, business is business, number one. There are best business practices that are going to go across the board. And number two, you can, in fact, learn a lot from looking at traditional martial arts gyms, seeing how they've, you know, created a profitable gym, not how they've, you know, run it martial arts wise or anything like that, but in terms of, you know, concepts like maximizing your revenue, you know, how to actually make money. That's a pretty big thing. And I'm going to keep talking here, Rob, for just a second because I don't want to dominate the conversation here, but you also mentioned about how there's sort of a perception about jiu-jitsu school owners that they make lots and lots of money and there's not a whole lot of work and everything, and it's just, man, you must be living the life. You just teach classes all day. Well, I can tell you for sure that we have in Richmond one of the most successful in terms of, you know, operations and finance and stuff like that, one of the most successful jiu-jitsu schools in the country. I mean, I would say it's top. I'm not trying to toot my own horn here. I would say we have like a top 1% jiu-jitsu school in terms of money and profitability and all that stuff. And I got to tell you, it's a struggle to make money doing this stuff, even for us, even today. It's not easy. It's a fight. You're going to be in a fight every single day if you start your own gym. If you're not up for that kind of thing, if you think it's going to be like easy money or something, you're in the wrong business. There are paths that will lead you to money and success much faster than opening a jiu-jitsu school will. And if you're not willing to go around 5 or 10 years and really work hard and start building this thing up and then start seeing decent profits from it, it may not be the right business for you. So I think that's, I may have completely forgotten the original question, Rob. Sorry about that, but I think that's, maybe this is some other stuff to think about a little bit too for some of the aspiring gym owners out there.
No, I mean, on this podcast we talk about it a lot because, you know, I think it's very romanticized as far as opening up a gym and being like, hey, you know what? It's cool. I got a gym. Everything's going to be fine. Like, there's the whole standing outside in front of the gym, handing out pamphlets. If you have good foot traffic, like, hey, why don't you try jiu-jitsu or taekwondo or whatever it may be? And then, like, the merchandise factor, and then making sure people are happy, and then making sure that, you know, if people don't show up to class even after they sign up, like, is everything all right? There's just a lot that goes into it that not a lot of people realize. And I just, maybe for me, it's more or less like, it's good to hear about gyms like your gym, you know, top 1% type gym where it's, you know, doing very well, but it's still a struggle every day to make sure it works. So that people, when they do eventually want to open up these gyms, they at least have some sort of understanding and some sort of idea of what that struggle is going to be like when they finally start doing it.
Yeah, you know, I think like there's money to be made in jiu-jitsu if you have a great business and you run it really well and you provide a genuine, legitimate service. You know, I think there are people that are doing well with it. But I mean, like I said, man, I mean, like we're in the top 1%. You know, if you think that you're better than that, if you can make more money than that or whatever it is, then and it's going to be easy money for you, then, you know, go for it. Go nuts. Have fun. You know, let me know how it works out for you. But I think that it helps a lot to calibrate realistic expectations about running a small business. It took a long time for me to understand that as well. And I mean, I've gotten much more interested in the business aspect of things, read as many books as I can get a hold of, and just tried to soak up as much information as I can since, you know, having my gym. It took a few years to even get to the point where I cared about that stuff because all I wanted to do in the beginning was, you know, teach jiu-jitsu, right?
Right. So another question I do have, this kind of has something to do with jiu-jitsu, but kind of not. You said one of the main reasons you moved to Richmond was the punk rock scene. And
yep.
Why don't you give me a little bit of insight in that? You know, really, I'm always interested to hear about everybody's, like, you know, we've talked before on this podcast about how kind of jiu-jitsu mirrors certain, like, subculture or, you know, counterculture type stuff. Like, so I find a lot of people who, like skateboarding, they also like jiu-jitsu. They're punk rockers and they like jiu-jitsu, just like different groups of people. They all get together because it's not really the norm, like to do jiu-jitsu like this. So why don't you give me a little insight on your punk rock, I guess, experience, or maybe like adventure up to Richmond for that.
Well, sure, yeah. So first of all, I think that's a great point, Rob. This jiu-jitsu is countercultural to a large degree. The funny thing about a countercultural movement, though, is that it tends to become culture if you give it enough time. If you look at, let's say, karate in the 1970s, karate was very much countercultural in the 1970s. But what happened was the 1980s came along and popular culture said, we're going to adopt this martial art and make it our own. And nowadays, as a result, even though karate came from Japan, it's about the most American martial art that there is. It's pretty ridiculous. And it's, of course, morphed into something that it didn't used to be. And there's, losses of integrity and belts given out and things like that. I think you probably see that a bit more from Taekwondo, but that's less because of the mainstream media. I think karate is a much more direct example of that. Punk rock is the same thing. Punk rock has been countercultural since its origins, tried to remain countercultural over time, and it was almost like appropriated by the mainstream, or at least what was presented as punk rock before. There's still plenty of that out there, and I don't think Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is mainstream by any stretch of the imagination yet, but I do think the writing is on the wall and it's becoming a mainstream martial art. So back to punk rock. Sorry, I've circled around the question so much there. For sure, what really appealed to me about punk music was the ethos, the idea that I could automatically exclude myself from society simply by looking differently, by embracing this different style of, a lack of style, essentially, kind of a rejection of cultural norms, those types of things, very much appealed to me when I was 17 years old. I'm sure that appeals to a lot of kids. I just chose, the direction that I chose was available. It was right in front of me. It was punk rock. I'm glad I did because it opened my mind to things that I never would have really paid attention to before. I guess I was sort of raised to be a normal type of person, go work a job somewhere for 30 years and then retire or whatever. Of course, the world's changed from underneath us as well. It's not really just me that's changed, But anyway, the excitement of that really, really called to me, really appealed to me, just completely changing my mind and not caring about what society had to say about an issue and just making up my own mind on my own. Sort of needed to reinvent the way that I thought about things a little bit. I hope that makes some sense. I hope that gives you some insight as to why punk rock appealed to me. But I think if you fast forward, a few years, I think jiu-jitsu appeals to many people for the same reason. Because it's kind of this secret knowledge, this hidden piece of knowledge. And I don't think that's really the best reason to get involved with jiu-jitsu or to get involved with anything, because lots of people get excited by things like secret knowledge,
Yeah.
And that's how you get people that are just conspiracy nuts and things like that. I have this piece of knowledge nobody else has. It's THC oil cures cancer. It's great, chemtrails caused autism, whatever it is this week.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. It's not. The point isn't having knowledge that nobody else has. The point is having knowledge that's true and correct for me. And so the great thing about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is that it's self-evidently correct. When you're rolling and you catch somebody in an arm bar, for sure you can break their arm if you have to, and vice versa. For certain when you're got, when you've been grabbed, and somebody's going to be able to, cause you to submit and things of that nature. And likewise for me, punk rock was self-evidently pure and true because my objective was society is bullshit. I need to, get away from it, exclude myself automatically. And sure enough, it worked, especially in South Carolina in 1993. I mean, it was pretty easy to exclude myself from society at large in that time frame. South Carolina is among the most conservative of states. That definitely extends to the dress, and it certainly did in the 90s. And facial piercings were not a thing. Colored hair was not a thing. Cutting your hair into a mohawk was not a thing. Wearing spikes and studs and things like that was, you would get the ire of everybody pretty much automatically by doing it. And that's exactly what I wanted, and that's exactly what I got. So thank you, punk rock, for helping me to grow up a little bit. It's pretty great.
No, I think it's good. I mean, it's I grew up in North Carolina. I grew up in Fuquay-Varina, North Carolina, specifically, which is kind of back in early 2000 wasn't exactly the biggest city in North Carolina. So I had a weird experience mainly because I went from private Catholic school, which the whole school was maybe 200 something people, to a public school, which is like each high school class had like 400 something people. So it was a real culture shock. And being the weird kid, I guess is the best way to put it, was nobody really like accepted me because I hadn't been there for a while. So I definitely wasn't hanging out with the popular kids or whatever you want to call them. So like, but what was cool is like the punk kids and the skateboarders, they didn't give a shit. They were just like, hey, why don't you come hang out with us? And that's kind of, I guess, like why one reason, like I guess it has like a little bit of a soft spot in my heart, is that it was they didn't give a fuck. They're just like, if you're just you, then it's cool. Like it doesn't really matter. So of course, obviously, I had to attempt to learn how to skateboard. I'm still shit at it, so it's it's no big deal. But it's kind of like jiu-jitsu as well. It's like to me, it's a very inviting type of community. And I mean, obviously, there's going to be some assholes in it where they're a little better than other people, and they don't want you in there. But for the majority of the people I've met in jiu-jitsu, it's been very inviting. So that's kind of why I see that some sort of parallel between the two subcultures, I guess, if you want to call it, of Brazilian jiu-jitsu, skateboarding, punk rock, like whatever it may be. And I guess that's kind of why I was really interested when you talked about moving to Richmond for your punk rock adventure.
Yeah, I think inclusive is a good way to describe jiu-jitsu for the most part. There certainly are cliques and things of that nature that, in particular, if we see a clique starting to form at our gym, our goal is to get rid of it immediately and not have it be a part of our culture. I think that vigilance is really important in that regard, back to the ownership thing. But, that's an extremely astute observation with regard to the punk community and jiu-jitsu. Again, while cliques can form in the punk scene, generally it matters who you are, not what social class you came from, not what, who your parents are, what the color of your skin is, or what, sexual orientation, none of that stuff. If you are interested in the same ethos as somebody who is punk, then they are going to be drawn to you if you practice what you preach and stuff like that, So it's the same thing with jiu-jitsu. All you have to do in order to be accepted by jiu-jitsu people is do jiu-jitsu. That's it. You can be, you can be anything from a janitor to a CEO to, a person with a physical disability to even a slight mental disability. It doesn't really matter with jiu-jitsu. People are going to support you and want you to succeed, and that's different than a lot of the things that are out there.
Very true. And something I was thinking about, too, when you're talking about inclusion and cliques and stuff like that. So you've been instructing for a while, obviously, since you opened your gym as a purple belt, almost brown belt. You got your brown belt. There's some interesting things that I guess have been, like in our group talked about was, I guess kind of dealing with students that may not have the same ideas as we do. And I know some instructors, even including myself, you have a student who may not really embrace the entire idea of including everybody or doesn't have the right attitude. Not necessarily like trying to beat up people and hurt them in class, but maybe like just an attitude. Like, what would be one of the best ways you think to help mitigate issues like that in your gym?
Well, that's definitely one of the big key challenges that we face on a daily basis right now. When you have a very small gym, it's it's a little easier, I think, to police behaviors and things like that. You can sort of take it as it comes. But I would say that the biggest thing that you can do for yourself in order to police behavior when you have a much bigger gym is just simply to create a system and have it in place. So in other words, have very specific rules in place that are going to encourage this system to develop. You know, I'll give you one example that isn't quite going to answer your question, but it's going to give you and everybody listening kind of an idea about a way to solve it, right? So for one thing, for us recently, and by recent I mean the last like 4 or 5 years, we've gotten more formal by necessity, right? We have lots and lots more students now, so naturally, when you run a gym with 40 people or whatever, it's one thing, you can play it by ear. But when you have a gym of 400, you need to really be careful with the culture. You have to observe it, and you have to pay attention to it, and then you have to act and protect it. So the thing that we tried to protect was respect for the class in session. That's a pretty big one for us. So what would happen before was, like, for instance, the class would be going on and people would be talking pretty loudly in the hallway, and, you know, that class is going on, somebody shows up kind of late for class, walks out onto the mat, you know, there wasn't really a rule in place or a standard in place. So we created a rule, and we rolled it out very slowly and carefully. And I would say that advice for people listening, that's going to take a lot longer than you think it's going to take, so just be ready for that. It'll make things much easier if you just say this is going to take 3 months to roll out this rule, not this is going to happen tomorrow and everybody's going to start paying attention to it.
Yeah.
I've been down that road, not a good road to go down. So, you know, we said, okay, well, you know, if you're late for class, this is how we solved one of the problems. The rule is you wait on the edge of the mat, the instructor welcomes you on. So it sort of puts the person on the spot, but it's kind of a light putting them on the spot version that meshes well with our culture. It's not like, broadcasting it to the entire gym. You know, it's just kind of person waits quietly until you welcome them onto the mat. They know they're late for class, and they're going to try to avoid that next time, but sometimes being late is inevitable, and waiting at the edge of the mat is the proper etiquette or protocol. So having systems in place, having protocol in place is pretty much, in my view, that's the best way to solve any issues like that come up that involve, you know, student behavior that you're trying to help, you know, a culture, an atmosphere. You know, you've got to protect your culture first and foremost, protect your atmosphere, because those are the things that are going to make your gym different from every single other gym out there. If you just want to have a gym that's just like every other gym out there, then you can not pay attention to the culture and not worry about it, and it'll figure it out. And what's going to happen is you're going to have students that are rough with one another, and you're going to have, people that show up late for class, because jiu-jitsu is necessarily informal, right? You cut through all the bullshit and you're left with informality. You're left with people that are not willing to follow the same standards of formality as everybody else. So this culture is by design very much. And if you allow the culture to start slipping at your gym, I mean, it's obvious what's going to happen. It's as though you're wrestling with another person. It's as though you're doing jiu-jitsu with another person. The culture is another person. They're going to get you if you're not paying attention to them. You can become the master of your culture, or you can let the culture become the master of you. Either way, one or the other is going to happen for sure.
Well, damn, that's actually really good insight. You know, especially since we all brought it together from the teaching of the school to, you know, kind of holding on to your students, making sure the culture is, you know, conducive to a good learning environment. Everybody's included. Like, I really do appreciate that insight in that. And I hopefully the listeners are going to enjoy that as well. And hopefully they get something out of it.
Yeah, I mean, that's my hope, Rob. I really want it for jiu-jitsu school owners. I'm definitely on their side. You know, I like talking with jiu-jitsu school owners, especially people that I really like, hearing how they're doing, people that start gyms and are going through struggles. Sometimes they'll ask me questions about it. If I have time, I'm happy to help them. Time is definitely more and more a precious commodity for me these days, but whenever I do have the time, that's actually something that I literally enjoy, helping people solve their problems and get better at that kind of stuff. And sure enough, when I talk to people openly like that kind of stuff, they'll have good ideas for me too, you know, and I can, if I just listen a little bit every once in a while, I'll come up with something else that I can enact almost right away with my gym.
Nice. Very nice. So, Andrew, I really wanted to thank you for coming on the show today. I know it's, doing it by phone sometimes a little difficult, but I do appreciate you giving us a lot of your insight as well as hearing about your story. and tying it into punk rock, especially because, I'm a little biased towards that. So thanks for coming on the show today.
Oh, sure, Rob. I had a blast, man. I'm glad that we got to do this for a little bit.
Me too. But before we go, is there anybody or any, company or anybody you want to give a shout out to before we end the podcast?
Well, I'll be a little selfish here. I do own part of another company called U.S. Grappling. I just want to give U.S. Grappling kind of a shout out because I think, I'm essentially around the same time I started my gym. I also started a tournament circuit called U.S. Grappling with some friends, and it's since grown into its own animal. And Brian and Chrissy Lindsay are the other owners right now. We have some great key employees that are doing a fantastic job with us. John Telford, Bagels is his nickname. He does a fantastic job with the staff management and a lot of other sort of high-level stuff. He's very helpful. And so I stepped away from running the tournament because, honestly, my presence wasn't really needed. I like to pay attention to vision and big picture stuff, but I really trust the people that are running U.S. Grappling on a daily basis, on a regular basis. I would just very selfishly, I guess, encourage your listeners to check out a U.S. Grappling event sometime because I think it's a different ethos than is out there at other tournaments. I think that U.S. Grappling really tends to care about the competitor base, and I'm not saying there's not any other tournaments out there that do that, but there certainly are organizations that seem to view the competitors more as a commodity than anything else. And U.S. Grappling has always viewed the competitors as just like us because, well, we've all been competitors over the years, and that's sort of the driving force behind it. So tournament circuit, U.S. Grappling, very good. Submission-only events and points events. I would say that that's the company I sort of want to highlight and shout out to. And, again, sort of a selfish full disclosure sort of thing there, but it's a great company run by really good people.
Excellent. And I've heard nothing but good stuff about U.S. Grappling. Everybody has a great time training or competing there and going there, so I haven't heard any negative stuff about U.S. Grappling. So when I'm back in the States, it's definitely going to be a point for me to go to a U.S. Grappling tournament and check it out myself.
That's awesome. My mission has been accomplished.
Well, Andrew, I really do appreciate you coming on the show today. It's been a lot of fun talking to you, especially, somebody being from at least kind of close enough to North Carolina with jiu-jitsu, so I kind of feel a little bit of a connection back at home.
I have sandwiched North Carolina in between my two states of residence.
That's perfect. So, Andrew, like I said, once again, thank you for coming on the show, and hopefully we get to do this again here soon and talk a little bit more about being a big guy in jiu-jitsu.
Sure. Thanks, Rob. Great talking to you, buddy.
Great talking to you, too. So, ladies and gentlemen, this has been the Big Jiu-Jitsu Show, a member of the Pod Bros Podcast Network. Don't forget to go to podbros.com and find yourself another episode or podcast you want to listen to. And check out our sponsors, Trap and Roll Soap Company, Rolls Gear, and Tape Armor. And don't forget to find all of our old episodes at bjjshow.com. I'm Rob, and we'll catch you guys next time.